Today we are jumping into, well, a foundational piece of software. Something that really shaped how an entire generation thinks about cities, about governance, and even about technology itself.
Oh, absolutely. We're putting SimCity on the table.
One of the most beloved, most influential computer games ever made.
I mean, it's the ultimate urban sandbox. For millions of players, it was the first time they ever thought about zoning or, infrastructure or municipal budgeting.
Right. But what we are uncovering today, the central argument here, is that beneath its playful, kind of open-ended exterior, SimCity is not a neutral model of how a city works.
Not at all.
That's the core thesis we're exploring. The idea that the code itself, the math running under the hood, is embedded with a really rigid partisan view of social planning.
Specifically, yeah, conservative, growth-focused philosophy.
We're calling it the libertarian toyland.
That's a great way to put it, because it gives you this illusion of freedom, of total creation, but it's structurally, constraining you. It's pushing the player toward a very specific set of policy outcomes.
Forcing you to become this kind of growth-obsessed, capitalistic manager.
Exactly. And to understand how that ideology ended up in the source code, we really have to go back to the mid-1980s, to the game's creator, Will Wright.
Okay, so he was designing his first commercial game, right, Raid, on Bungling Bay.
Yeah, which was a helicopter combat game, pretty standard for the time. But while he was making the levels for the game, the digital islands and maps, he had this huge realization.
That building the world was actually the fun part.
Yes. The process of building the infrastructure, the landscape, he found it way more enjoyable than the actual combat loop he was supposed to be selling.
So we thought, why not just give players that part? The joy of creation. Let them build their own city and, manage its health.
It was a pure design idea, almost utopian.
But purity doesn't sell, apparently.
Not easily, no. When Wright took this concept, which was called the city simulator back then, to big publishers like Bund, they just rejected it.
Why? What was the problem?
They just couldn't wrap their heads around it. A game with no clear winner or loser, no final boss, no ultimate score.
It had to have a clear mission, a clear success criteria.
Yeah, they insisted. And this really challenged the fundamental idea in the industry of what a game was supposed to be.
But he pushed back on that.
He did. He famously compared his vision to Legos, a system for open-ended creativity. So he co-founded his own company, Maxis, released SimCity in 1989, and, well, he proved the publishers spectacularly wrong.
It was a smash success, the top-selling computer game of its time. It completely changed the landscape for simulation software.
It absolutely did. The game resonated. It taught people that complexity could actually be fun.
But our mission today is to move past that initial awe. We need to unpack the precise mathematical and theoretical assumptions that are baked into SimCity's DNA.
And trace them back to their source.
Exactly, and show how they really constrain your political freedom when you're sitting in that mayor's chair.
We want to show you that every time you load up a map, you aren't just playing a game about a city. You're playing a simulation that's based on a very specific and very politically charged theory of how cities ought to function.
Okay, so let's unpack this political DNA. This is where the story pivots from, fun game design to some really serious, contested political philosophy.
Right, because Will Wright wasn't just coding based on his intuition.
No, the source material shows he treated this like a research project. He was reading deeply into urban planning theory.
He really was. Wright said he read at least 20 books on urban planning and simulation theory back in the mid-'80s just to prepare. But there was one influence that just stood head and shoulders above all the others.
And he cited this one specifically?
He did. An MIT professor named Jay Forrester and his seminal 1969 work, Urban Dynamics.
So this is it. This is the intellectual source of the code.
This is the source. And Forrester wasn't building a model for fun. He was trying to use mathematical modeling to solve the intractable problems facing American cities in the 60s and 70s.
He was the godfather of a field he pioneered, right? System dynamics.
Exactly. System dynamics is all about modeling complex feedback loops. How things that seem totally separate actually influence each other over time.
So Wright took Forrester's model, which was entirely numerical, just pages and pages of beta.
Right. And in his own words, he put flesh onto Jay Forrester's equations. He made it visual. He saw the game as a test bed, or like a guinea pig city, for these planning theories.
Let's stay on Jay Forrester for a minute, because his central idea is really what defines the whole challenge of the game. He argued that complex social systems are fundamentally counterintuitive.
That's the core of his entire, very controversial thesis.
What does he mean by that, though, in the context of a city?
It means that the intuitive, common-sense solutions that we instinctively want to apply to the social problems, things like poverty, urban decay, housing shortages, he claimed they actually make those problems worse.
So you pull one lever to fix problem A.
And because of some hidden feedback loop you can't see, you end up making problem B worse, or even making problem A worse down the line. The obvious fix is a hidden trap.
Wow.
And his model was incredibly detailed for the time. He spent months feeding data into this thing, reducing the city's problems down to 150 equations and 200 parameters. It generated over 2,000 pages of printouts to back up his claims.
Can you give us a concrete example, something from urban dynamics that would have just horrified a planner from that era?
Oh, absolutely. The most inflammatory finding was probably about housing and poverty. At the time, you had the Great Society programs trying to alleviate poverty through direct state intervention.
Right, building large amounts of low-cost housing.
Exactly. And Forrester's model argued that this policy was completely and utterly misguided.
Why? I mean, intuitively, more housing should help with a housing shortage.
See, there's that word intuitively. According to Forrester's system model, increasing the stock of low-cost housing actually increased the overall burden of poverty in the city.
How does that even work?
The argument was based on migration. He theorized that if a city suddenly had a ton of cheap housing, it would create a migration pull factor. It would attract more low-income populations from all the surrounding regions than the city's job base could actually support.
So you're not alleviating poverty, you're just concentrating it. And you're increasing the number of people who are struggling for the same limited resources.
That's it, exactly. The ratio of jobs to available poor workers gets worse. So Forrester concluded the city's resources get diluted and the quality of life for all low-income residents actually goes down because of this overconcentration and resource strain.
That is a brutal conclusion.
It's a cruel conclusion, but it's mathematically consistent inside his model. And it directly challenged the entire policy consensus of the time, the big government interventions of the Great Society.
So he was basically providing a mathematical argument for a hands-off approach.
Or at least a severely restricted one. Forrester's conclusion was that instead of funding direct social welfare like welfare checks, low-cost housing, job-training cities should focus on revitalization indirectly.
What does that look like in his model?
It looks like financial incentives, tax breaks, infrastructure investment, but targeted exclusively at attracting new business and high-skill professional class people.
The trickle-down theory.
Essentially, yes. The idea was that if you bring in high-value commerce, the benefits will eventually trickle down and raise the economic tide for everyone, and the state wouldn't have to do the messy, counterproductive work of direct poverty alleviation.
So he was building this highly technical mathematical foundation for a conservative or libertarian skepticism of big government policy.
You've nailed it. The idea that government intervention, even when it's well-intentioned, always does more harm than good. That's why his work was so popular with conservative writers. And this whole mindset, this preference for financial incentives over direct welfare, was transferred almost invisibly right into the mathematical DNA of SimCity.
So when I fire up the game, I'm inheriting a system where indirect, financially driven growth is the only real path to survival.
Yes, and direct social spending is mathematically framed as a drain or a liability.
It defines the necessary conservatism you need to succeed in the game.
You're literally playing out Jay Forrester's economic theory. The city must prioritize attracting capital and maximizing land value, even if that means inequality or neglecting the very people the Great Society was trying to help. That ideology is right there in the equations.
Okay, so if Forrester's theory is the ideological engine, then the gameplay itself sort of forces the player into what sociologists call the growth machine theory of how cities are governed.
Right. The game is focused almost obsessively on expansion.
It has a really narrow kind of monetarist definition of what it means to win.
It really does. The goal is quantified accumulation and just continuous expansion. If you look at the game's main metrics, success is measured by two things: population size, and even more important than that, land value.
Land value. That feels like such a cold, bureaucratic metric. Why is that the absolute keystone for success?
Because it's the foundation of the whole economic feedback loop in the simulation, especially in a game like SimCity 4. Land value determines the height and the quality of the buildings that pop up in your zones.
So low land value gets you, what, little houses and rundown factories?
Exactly. But high land value gets you skyscrapers, luxury condos, thriving corporate parks.
And those high-value properties are what give you the massive tax base you need to fund everything else.
That's the loop. Land value is the precursor to generating serious tax revenue, which is your budget. And beyond that, unlocking the biggest, coolest buildings, getting that iconic skyline, that's the visual confirmation to the player that they've won.
So the game is constantly, subtly or not so subtly, directing you to maximize land value.
Often at the expense of literally everything else. And this loop is driven by that famous RCI demand meter.
Residential, commercial, and industrial demand.
Yep. That meter is basically the game's simplified market signal. Your whole job as mayor is just to keep those 3 bars high by balancing your taxes, your services, and your zoning.
If residential demand is high, you zone more residential.
That's zone R. If commercial is high, you zone C. The system structurally guarantees this constant need for expansion. Stasis is failure.
If demand is always high, you have to keep growing. The game basically says that if you're not growing, you're dying.
It does. If you stop growing, demand drops, your tax revenue stagnates, and the city starts this cycle of decay. The built-in assumption is that a city is an economic engine. Its main purpose is to generate capital and population growth. Anything that gets in the way of that is a failure.
Let's talk about that paradox you mentioned earlier. You have this dictatorial mayor in a libertarian toyland. The player is this omnipotent technocrat. You control all the utilities, the roads, the police, the entire tax structure. One source even called it a Marxist fantasyland.
And that term is jarring, so we have to be really careful with it. It's a Marxist fantasyland, only in the sense that the player, the mayor, is a single centralized authority who owns the means of infrastructure production.
The power plants, the water towers, the transit systems.
All of it. And the Sims, your residents, are just these abstracted agents whose behavior is totally dictated by the environmental conditions you set.
They don't protest, they don't vote, they just move in or move out based on numbers like commute time, pollution, and service coverage.
Precisely. They have no political agency. But the goal of this all-powerful central planner, the mayor, is purely capitalistic accumulation. So you have this single omnipotent manager running a system that is defined by relentless market growth.
It reinforces this managerial philosophy where urban life is just a series of technical problems you can solve.
And that abstraction is so key, because in the real world, city planning is all about conflict.
Oh yeah. Eminent bywise, zoning disputes, elections, unions, racial justice issues.
All of that messy human conflict is just abstracted away in SimCity. It turns governance into a technical problem for a rational agent, the mayor, to solve. You never have to negotiate with a city council.
You just set the tax rate, you don't deal with social movements, you just deal with crime rates.
And the goal is always quantified accumulation, wealth and population over any kind of holistic, non-quantifiable quality of life.
This structural bias even shows up in the physical design choices the game encourages. It really pushes a specific car-centric American model of urban planning.
It does. The game is inherently constrained by sort of the orthodoxy of post-World War II American planning. The whole system, especially the zoning tool, it assumes and it rewards building in a rigid grid fashion.
That's why successful SimCity cities always end up looking like Phoenix or parts of LA.
They do. They become these dense, automobile-dependent American metropolises.
Can you even design something else, like a walkable European-style city?
Not really. Not effectively. Especially in the earlier games. The system just lacked the tools and, more importantly, the reward structure.
Okay.
For pedestrian areas or dedicated bike traffic, everything is scaled around the road network.
Because your Sims have to commute.
They have to commute quickly. If they can't, they're happiness drops and they leave, no matter how beautiful your town square is. The game reinforces automobile dependence as the optimal, most efficient choice.
Okay, so we've got the theoretical engine from Forrester and the structural goal of the growth machine. Now let's get to the mechanical proof, the actual levers the player pulls.
Right, how they're weighted.
If the game is a libertarian toyland, we should see the simulation implicitly penalizing traditionally progressive policies, making them economically inefficient or just unsustainable.
And this is where the game turns utopian dreams into fiscal nightmares. If you, as a player, strive for a city with generous healthcare, world-class education, high social welfare, a truly progressive metropolis,
You have to pay for it somehow.
you often have to subsidize it with massive, sometimes ethically questionable capital just to keep a budget surplus.
Explain that unsavory deal mechanic. What are these choices that generate that kind of cash?
These are things the game often calls neighbor deals or certain financial ordinances. You generate huge cash flow by allowing things into your city that nobody, not your neighbors or your own Sims, actually wants.
We're talking toxic waste dumps.
Toxic waste dumps, max security prisons, military facilities like missile testing ranges.
So high social welfare is presented as this costly indulgence, and the only way to afford it is to sell out and rely on hyper-efficient, often destructive forms of production.
The code makes it a zero-sum game. You can have great social services, but only if you're willing to pollute or deal in prisons and waste. The game's message is that a high welfare state has to be subsidized by the most profitable and often most damaging forms of capitalism.
Let's break down the actual finance mechanics, taxes and debt, especially in SimCity 2000 and SimCity 4. The game forces you down a very narrow fiscal path.
The property tax is the perfect example. The official strategy guides for these games all point to a very, very narrow sweet spot for stable income and growth,
Which is?
typically 7 to 9%. That is the center-right consensus baked right into the math.
Okay, so what happens if I try to be a Scandinavian-style socialist mayor and I jack the taxes up to, say, 12% to fund everything?
The system just brutally punishes you for that. You get a spike in income at first, but then the simulation triggers a massive flight mechanic. Sims are, and I quote, very likely to move away. Commercial demand craters, because businesses see it as a hostile environment. Industry collapses.
So the revenue gains are completely wiped out by the loss of your tax base.
Very quickly. And what if you try to be a radical, low-tax supply-sider and you drop taxes below 6%?
A boom in growth.
You might see a temporary boom in demand, but the simulation guarantees poor income. Your infrastructure gets strained, your services become inadequate, and you can't generate enough money to unlock the good buildings or even maintain the city. The system forces you into that narrow 7 to 9% band.
Which confirms the simulation's bias toward a fiscally moderate suit. And this same conservatism applies to debt, right? The game actively discourages it.
Aggressively discourages it. The strategy guides are so clear about this. The official SimCity 2000 guide had this powerful warning. It said, don't ever take a bond out. Bonds are a trap that will kill your city and income.
Wow.
The mechanics are structured so that the interest payments are just incredibly punitive. It's always better, the game suggests, to just ride out a lack of funds and recover later than to borrow for necessary infrastructure.
That is a profoundly conservative fiscal philosophy. Debt isn't an investment tool. It's a deadly liability.
It absolutely is. And even if you try other ways to generate revenue, like financial ordinances, they're also discouraged.
Like what?
Consumption tax or legalizing gambling. They might increase your income, but they also reduce commercial demand or dramatically increase crime. So the guides usually tell you to avoid them. The message is clear. Your income should come from property taxes and industry, not these creative revenue streams.
Let's talk about managing services like health and education. How does the game turn these essential public goods into sources of intense managerial friction?
They just require this meticulous micromanagement. If your capacity is low, even if your overall funding is fine, the schools and hospitals will go on strike or trigger negative news alerts constantly.
So the player's focus immediately shifts to optimization, to budget cuts, to getting that crucial FAT surplus.
And this is where you see players adopting a very cold, purely managerial mindset. The strategies that emerged in the player communities were all about this.
What kind of strategies?
Strictly cutting service budgets. The common advice was to only run police and fire departments where absolutely necessary. Just place them far enough apart to cover your most valuable zone.
And cut funding for other things.
Cutting bus and ambulance funding to zero was standard practice until you were just rolling in cash. Public services are treated as an expense to be minimized, not a system for human benefit.
It creates this weirdly adversarial relationship between the mayor and the needs of the Sims.
It's perfectly encapsulated in this one anecdote from a player on a SimCity forum. It's so revealing.
What happened?
This player was struggling with their healthcare system. They were funding the hospitals, but the Sims were still complaining through the news tickers about, lack of access or staff. And because the player, the omnipotent technocrat, couldn't solve the messy human problems.
Bureaucracy, hiring disputes.
Right, all that stuff. Their frustration just boiled over into the only solution the game gives you, the managerial one. They said they wanted to demolish every clinic and hospital to fire those whiny jerks who were complaining.
That's chilling. The game's rigidity drove the player to view the citizens with contempt. They became obstacles to optimizing the budget rather than the whole purpose of the budget.
It shows how the game's assumptions can corrupt your whole mindset about governance. The system privileges a single, rational financial solution over social well-being.
And this bias extends to the environment, too. The game forces this uncomfortable trade-off between profit and the planet.
Without a doubt. Take the Pollution Reduction Policies Ordinance in SimCity 2000. You can enact it, it reduces pollution, but the description explicitly says it has a negative effect on industrial growth.
So it's costly.
It's economically unfavorable compared to just building another dirty but highly efficient power plant. The code ensures that economic growth is always the precondition for winning, and environmentalism is just a costly barrier to that progress.
So if the underlying logic of SimCity is this purely monetarist, growth at all costs model, what happens when a player actually executes that logic perfectly?
That's the key question.
When they achieve maximum efficiency according to the game's own rules, the outcome is often profoundly inhuman. It demonstrates the toxicity of those core assumptions.
And the defining example of this is a virtual city called Magnasanti.
Right. This was created by a player named Vincent Ocasla in SimCity 3000.
Yes. And Ocasla meticulously optimized a city of 6 million people, focusing only on two goals: maximum population density and longevity. He pushed the game's market logic to its absolute limit.
And was it a success by the game's own metrics?
Oh, it was the perfect city according to the algorithm. Perfect RCI balance, optimized traffic flow, maximum population for this space. But the result was a horrifying anti-human outcome.
Describe it for us. What did Magnasanti look like?
Visually, it was a vast monolithic grid. It was highly regimented, densely packed, and just utterly isolating. The Sims lived in these monotonous blocks with minimal services, working grueling hours, all designed to maximize the economic output of every single square tile.
So no parks, no public spaces.
None of the qualitative features we associate with a high quality of life. It was profoundly sterile.
But Ocasla's goal wasn't just to win the game. It was a critique of the system itself.
It was, absolutely. He intended Magnasanti to be a statement on what he called the lethality of the game's managerial assumptions. He proved that if you perfectly execute the game's market logic, you produce a virtual dystopia. The system rewards quantified technoscientism over the qualitative well-being of its people.
Which leads us to maybe the game's most uncomfortable truth. The Sims themselves are just disposable resources in this machine.
They're reduced to these highly abstracted economic agents. In the 2013 reboot of SimCity, the developers openly call the residents selfless little troopers and contract wage laborers.
Their whole existence is just an endless loop of labor, consumption, and filling capacity requirements.
They exist only to work, pay taxes, and keep the RCI demand high. They have no internal political life, no personal ambition outside of these core economic functions.
And their indifference to crisis is the most disturbing part.
It really is. If their home gets destroyed in a fire or a monster attack, they just instantly move into a new one, or they just disappear. It's all, quote, in the name of keeping the city running as effectively as possible.
They're just interchangeable temps, simulating labor so the mayor can focus on management. They never protest their conditions, even in a place like Magnasanti.
Never. And this embedded conservative bias also dictates how the mayor should handle urban decay. It actually mimics the logic of some of the most disastrous policies of the 20th century.
You're talking about urban renewal.
We are. In SimCity, the rational managerial solution to low land values and older developments that aren't pulling their weight financially is the bulldozer. The game tells you to plow down your decaying zones and replace them with new zones to attract wealthier residents.
And post-World War II, urban renewal was considered disastrous in the real world because
It prioritized massive capital investment and slum clearance over community stability. It destroyed established, often vibrant, low-income neighborhoods and replaced them with sterile, high-density housing or commercial developments. It displaced hundreds of thousands of people.
And the game mechanizes this process. It turns human displacement into just another management task. It normalizes it.
It absolutely naturalizes that destructive logic. The structural need to maximize land value subtly encourages a form of residential segregation.
Because to keep tax revenue high, you're implicitly encouraged to engineer the city to attract high-wealth residents.
Which means removing or isolating, quote, cores of low-income, poorly educated residents. The game suggests that the removal of the poor is a necessary step to achieve urban prosperity, that it's just a rational, technical solution. The ideology in the code mirrors and reinforces real historical patterns of exclusion.
So despite all these profound political constraints that are baked into the code, SimCity is still one of the most important pieces of urban design pedagogy ever created.
Oh, its legacy is undeniably massive.
It introduced millions of people to concepts like zoning and infrastructure planning. It inspired countless real architects and urban designers.
And not because it gave realistic policy advice, we've seen it clearly did not, but because it was the first piece of software that democratized the visualization of complex systems.
Right. It took these dry, abstract urban concepts and made them tangible.
It made them tangible results and, maybe more importantly, tangible frustrations for a mass audience.
And that visualization technique has now moved from consumer software into professional tools. The rise of serious games.
Exactly. We see SimCity-inspired models being used for real-life project planning now. There's a Dutch company, Takedown, that developed a professional model used in workshops for real urban resiliency projects.
So they're adapting that visualization style for real-world challenges.
Yeah, things like planning for climate change in Lower Manhattan. It just proves the pedagogical power of modeling systems this way.
Okay, now we have to talk about how the algorithmic logic of SimCity has basically escaped the screen, how it's become an actual proposed business model for managing human life.
The rise of the smart city.
This is the critical transition from game theory to reality.
It really is. Because smart cities, like the fully planned city of Songdo in South Korea, are fundamentally built on that core SimCity assumption, that a city is a hyper-rational economic engine. The key resource, though, isn't just land anymore. It's data.
Explain how data becomes the new resource in that model.
A smart city is built with sensors and computing infrastructure everywhere. It collects everything from traffic patterns and energy use to waste output and citizen movement. And this massive collection of data is viewed, just like tax revenue in the game, as an immensely profitable digital resource that can be mined for wealth.
It's the ultimate real-time RCI meter.
You've got it. So if the goal in SimCity was to optimize zones for maximum tax output, the goal in the smart city is to optimize data streams for maximum commercial monetization.
And this thinking has led to the concept of a universal city OS.
An urban operating system, or UOS. Companies like Living Planet are actively developing this kind of proprietary software platform. It's designed to manage and license a city's resources, its utilities, its transit, its buildings, and its citizens' data to governments and investors.
The implication there is so much more profound than just controlling a video game budget. If the city becomes a complete, managed, algorithmic system, who owns the operating system?
And that's the terrifying question. Those who own the UOS will own the data. They'll control the infrastructure, and they will effectively manage the lives of the citizens. The Sims, those selfless little troopers, they stop being abstract figures. They become real people whose behavior is monitored and optimized for efficiency and profit by a proprietary corporate algorithm.
The playful logic of the libertarian toyland, where the manager maximizes efficiency and treats human needs as externalities, becomes the actual business plan for governance at scale.
It does.
So we circle all the way back to our starting point. SimCity is not a neutral simulation.
Not even close. Its structure came from Jay Forrester's anti-welfare systems dynamics equations. It trained millions of players to see city management as this relentless, amoral pursuit of quantified monetary growth,
Prioritizing population size and land value above everything else.
the simulation models a city as a hyper-rational economic engine that's optimized for market efficiency, not as the messy, politically complex human ecosystem that we all actually live in.
It teaches the neoliberal common sense that growth is the only success metric and that debt is a deadly trap.
Yeah.
So if we accept the incredible pedagogical power of these simulations, then how do future city simulators need to evolve to offer true political pluralism? How do you code a game that doesn't just teach us that the capitalistic growth machine is the only way?
I think you have to fundamentally challenge that omnipotent technocrat fantasy. Future simulations need to integrate genuine structural political friction.
Not just random monster attacks.
No, not just random events. Simulation layers that are dedicated to NIMBYism, to zoning disputes, to electoral cycles, to social equity challenges. All the complexities SimCity abstracted away to make itself solvable.
And you have to break the link between success and the city's bank account.
Absolutely. The success metrics have to be diversified. They have to be decoupled from continuous capitalistic expansion. A player should be able to achieve a viable and enjoyable win state based on things like social cohesion, or sustained zero growth stability, or environmental health.
proving that a healthy city doesn't necessarily mean a city that's optimized for profit.
Exactly.
Which raises one final provocative thought. If the pursuit of perfect financial optimization in SimCity leads inevitably to the optimized nightmare of a place like Magnasanti, what kind of systemic failure, political, social, environmental, would need to be built into the next generation of city simulators to truly teach us the meaning of a healthy city?
If the current model teaches us how to maximize capital, what rule set would you code to test your ideal urban imaginary? What kind of game would you build that, when you play it perfectly, yields genuine human fulfillment and justice, even if it comes at the expense of maximized wealth?
We'll leave that question with you as you reflect on the invisible rules governing both the virtual and the real cities you inhabit. That was the deep dive.